Welcome everybody to the Liturgy of the Chalice. Today we continue our discussions on the Gospel of Mark. This is part 25 of a series. So the last time that we met, Jesus was outside of the temple, and he's looking from the Mount of Olives down onto the area of the second temple. And his disciples say how great the second temple looks. And Jesus said that not even one stone will lay unturned. In other words, the whole second temple was prophesied by Jesus to be destroyed. And with it, the corrupt second temple priesthood, whom Jesus felt was interpreting Torah too legalistically and with no sense of the heart or opening up the spiritual heart. So Jesus foresaw that because the Pharisees and Sadducees of the time were trying to fill up their pocketbooks more than they were trying to fill up heaven, he prophesied that it would all be brought down. It would be allowed to be brought down by the Roman Empire, which in 70 AD, about 40 years after the death of Christ, in 70 AD, the Romans would sack Jerusalem and destroy it and reduce the second temple to rubble. So what we last came about was that Jesus foresaw and warned his disciples that this was to come within their lifetimes. And he gave them certain signs, when famines would come, natural disasters would come, when there were rumors of war, that you should take this seriously and get out of town. Because if Jesus's first living disciples stayed in Jerusalem, instead of fleeing Jerusalem, then not only would they die, but Jesus' teachings would have died also. So Jesus warned them that there would be certain signs that would predate the destruction of Jerusalem and the second temple. And he told his disciples to watch for these signs. For these signs would begin the beginning of the birth pains. And that's what's really interesting, as we said in our last class. This idea that the birth pangs would begin with the fall of the second temple in Jerusalem. Birth pangs of what? Birth pangs of the Messiah, the Anointed One. So again, if Jesus was already alive before the fall of the second temple in Jerusalem, how could he experience birth pangs? If Jesus was the so-called Davidic Messiah, which he satirized and rejected the idea of a Davidic Messiah, how could he come to birth after he'd already been born? It's not logical. Jesus continues with this idea here. He warns his disciples about false messiahs. Mark 13:21 through 23. It says, "And if anyone says to you at the time when Jerusalem is being ransacked and the temple is being reduced to dust by the Roman Empire, if anyone says to you at that time, 'Look, here is the Messiah,' or 'Look, there he is,' do not believe it. False messiahs and false prophets will appear and produce signs and omens to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But be alert. I have already told you everything." So Jesus taught a very specific kind of Messiah, as we all know. It is the Son of Man Messiah. The Son of Man Messiah is not the same messianic expectation as the Davidic Messiah. They are two very different messianic expectations. And Jesus did not accept the concept of the Davidic Messiah. He denounced it, he satirized it, he rejected it in the Gospel of Mark itself. However, the Davidic Messiah was the messianic expectation of Jerusalem. And it's quite possible that many people believed Jesus was the Davidic Messiah. We see throughout the Christian canon the idea that Jesus is called the Son of David. And as I've said many times, it is possible that Jesus was of Davidic lineage. It's possible. It's possible. However, Jesus did not self-identify as the Davidic Messiah, the Messiah ben David, the Messiah, son of David, or of the descent of lineage from King David. He didn't accept that for himself. And in Jerusalem, we have to understand that they conceived that at the end of the world, they were expecting a cataclysmic end of the world as they knew it to be. And they expected that the Davidic Messiah would come down from the clouds onto the earth, wipe out all the Roman and other political opposition to Israel, and that King David would take his spot on Mount Zion, where the throne of Yahweh is at, and he would establish a new Jerusalem, and that all the world would be ruled by this Davidic Messiah. So imagine what many people in Jerusalem would imagine or think when they saw the Roman hordes coming in and destroying their homes, raping, murdering, starving the Jewish people, destroying their temple. They would think it's the end of the world, or at least the end of the world as they knew it. And during such times, people would take advantage. People take advantage when there's destruction, confusion, violence. And there were many people historically that claimed to be the Davidic Messiah and ultimately were executed by the Roman Empire. So Jesus here warns them that during this cataclysmic time, when their whole way of life would be destroyed, and many of the Judean Pharisees and people of Jerusalem would be expecting and begging and crying and screaming for their Davidic Messiah to come to save them. They would say, here's the Messiah. This person's saying he's the Messiah, ben David. No, there he is. And all these figures would come about and take advantage of the confusion and the attack of Rome on Jerusalem. So Jesus was warning his hearers, don't be confused about what everybody else is saying. You already know what I say Messiah is. And that is the Son of Man Messiah, the Son of Mankind Collective Messiah, the Bar Enash in Aramaic. That is what Jesus taught. The term Son of Man was used 81 times throughout the Christian Testament. Never once did Jesus teach about the Davidic Messiah, other than to denounce it in Mark, which I believe was 12:25 through 27, or 27 through 35. Check out that area. Why do the scribes say that the Son of David is the Messiah? Check it out. Jesus taught that every human soul that seeks God with pure love, in pure spirit, in truth and in spirit, and in love, that such a person can become anointed of God and become an individual Messiah. We are all born in the first Adam, fallen humanity, so to speak. Fallen not because we're not divine, not because we're low down, dirty sinners, but we're fallen because we are selfish and we don't prioritize God first in our lives, especially in this modern age. Jesus' halakha, his teachings, were to open our hearts to seek God first, and all things shall be added unto us, including spiritual rebirth. And that spiritual rebirth is being reborn from the first Adam, the first humanity, into the second Adam, which is the Enash, or the Son of Mankind, corporate or collective Messiah. This Messiah that Jesus taught was the communion of saints, and each of us can spiritually mature to be a part of that Messiah, that collective Messiah. So Jesus did not want people in that frenzy of emotion to sway from his teachings to the teaching of the Davidic Messiah, which Jesus felt was incorrect. So there's some redaction and twist here in Mark 13. And it seems, based off of contemporary readings of Mark 13, 24 through 27, that Jesus might be predicting the Davidic Messiah. But it's only because of the theological and Christological developments of the medieval Roman Catholic Church that people read it this way. Mark 13, 24 through 27. But in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. So this is redaction, and the way it's taught in modern churches is greatly twisted. Again, we already know that modern churches will say that this is Jesus predicting his own second coming. The sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, stars will be falling from the heavens, the powers of heaven will be shaken. It's the end of the world. And then you'll see the Son of Man, which is interpreted in Orthodox Christianity as being Jesus alone, not the collective Messiah, which Jesus actually taught. Then they'll see Jesus coming down from the clouds with great power and glory. This second coming of Jesus in the end times. And he'll send out his angels to gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. So all the good people will come with Jesus, the second coming, and all the bad people are going to go you know where. Down to a very warm, uncomfortable place. So that interpretation is incorrect to the authentic historical teachings of Jesus. But in those days after that suffering, after Jerusalem is brought to dust, the second temple has fallen, The sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven. This could refer to astrological phenomenon that may be able to trace back a probable date to the fall of the temple. It could be talking about eclipses of the sun and or the moon. It could be talking about different events like comets or meteors falling from the sky at that time. It could be pure poetry of the horror of what went on. The sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, which could symbolize simply the lack of hope that the Jewish people were feeling at that time. Stars will be falling from the heavens. Oftentimes when they saw falling shooting stars or comets or meteors, early ancient people would think that those were signs of devastation, which in fact they might be from an astrological perspective. The sun could simply have been darkened because of the dust. Imagine the fire that the Romans rained down on Jerusalem. There'd be fires with smoke and soot covering the whole sky where people couldn't see 2 feet in front of them, let alone the sun. The moon will not give its light. It could have been a lunar eclipse. It could have been the soot in the air from the smoke. It could have been just that it was the dark phase of the moon. This does not mean the end of the world, even if it felt that way to some Jews. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. If this is historical, if we are to untwist the twisted theological wrangling that the early Christians did to Jesus' teachings, it would mean that after the suffering is done, the immediate destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple, they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and great glory. The Son of Man is, of course, the Enash, the collective Messiah, the power, the realization of the Son of Man Messiah. In order to become part of this communion of saints, you had to raise your consciousness. You had to purify and sanctify your hearts. You had to make a return to God and live the Torah. When that happened, you would have a spiritual rebirth, and you would realize your oneness with the Son of Man, collective Messiah. In other words, they will see, they will intuit the coming of the Son of Man within their hearts in this spiritual rebirth. And it's only after physical transition or death that we fully take part in the messianic marriage banquet, where our soul is made one with the Enash, the Son of Man Messiah. They will see the Son of Man coming in clouds, anon. Anon is cloud. And in Jewish thinking, clouds concealed something. They concealed mysteries, the Ratzim of heaven. The mysteries of heaven were obscured by poetic clouds or anamim. So it is during times of confusion and destruction and distress that spiritual people grow. It's just a fact. Even in everyday life, we only grow by experiencing trouble in life. Such suffering, such oppression, such depression that they must have been feeling makes them either collapse and give up or just seek God all the more. And Jesus' disciples sought God more. Here Jesus is saying they, the disciples, the followers of Jesus that were doing his teachings, embodying his teachings in thought, word, and deed, they will intuit the Son of Man. They will become the Son of Man, coming in clouds, coming with all the great mysteries of heaven. They will inherit those. The Son of Man, collective Messiah, will send out angels to gather his elect from all four winds, the ends of the earth and the ends of the heaven. In other words, this cataclysmic event was the beginning of the birth pangs of a new humanity. Jesus' teachings were about compassion, about being a good part of humanity, about being a steward for the earth. The birth pains of the Messiah were instigated by the trauma of the fall of the Second Temple, the fall of Jerusalem. And from there, people would seek to rebuild physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And those who were spiritually ripe, the Son of Mankind would send out angels to gather those that had been chosen to be incorporated into the communion of saints. And this goes on to this day. It didn't end then or shortly after the death of Jesus. This spiritual restoration of humanity, this rebirthing of the first Adam into the second Adam, is going on to this day, and it will be happening long after we're gone. In Mark 13:28-31, Jesus says, "From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branches become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." So Jesus is saying a very beautiful yet scary thing to his disciples. He's saying, just as you know, as soon as the branch of a fig tree becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. You know it's coming. You know there's a change of season. A new age is coming. So when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near, at the very gates. So when you see natural disasters happening, when you see famines happening, when you hear of wars nearby, get out, because you know the destruction is near. And you also know that he, the Son of Mankind, collective Messiah, is near at the very gates, because this destruction of Jerusalem, destruction of the Second Temple, heralds the birth pangs of a new humanity that will continue into the future. And this beginning of the birth pangs of Messiah will take place in this generation. In other words, the people that were right around Jesus all those thousands of years ago. This generation will not pass away. You will not die until all of these things have taken place. Until Jerusalem is destroyed, until the Second Temple falls, until the birth pangs of Messiah begin, and some of you are reborn into it. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words, my teachings, my halakha, my prophecies will not pass away. So isn't heaven eternal? How can heaven pass away? We all understand that the earth will someday pass away. The earth is just our macrocosmic body. if these microcosmic bodies, these little human bodies, die and dissolve, we see flowers die and dissolve, we see trees die and dissolve, animals die and dissolve, then it's only natural that someday the earth will also pass away. But isn't heaven eternal? If heaven passes away, don't all souls just die? What is eternal life? We have to understand that heaven is not the eternal heavens. It's not the Olam Haba. It's not the world to come in which we are with God. There are 7 Olamim. Olamim are heavenly spheres or heavenly realities in the Isaiah scheme of things, according to writings attributed to Isaiah. According to the Enochian scheme of things, there are 10 Olamim, or 10 spiritual realities. He divides them a little bit differently than Isaiah did. There are, in both schemes, whether it's Isaiah or Enochian, the first 2 heavens are the day sky and the night sky. So the first Olamim in both schemes is the day sky. The second Olamim is the night sky. And then beyond that, the third sphere begins the eternal realities that will always exist. So you can think of the day sky and the night sky as being the atmosphere of Earth and even outer space, which is just a more subtle physical creation of God or physical emanation of God. So one day, not only will the earth dissolve, but the whole universe, the atmosphere of Earth, the day sky, and the night sky, which is what we see of outer space, right? The stars, the moon, the constellations, they're all in outer space. That night sky will also disappear. That is the heaven that will pass away. The atmosphere of Earth and outer space. Essentially, the emanated universe will eventually dissolve within itself. But Jesus says, my teachings are eternal. Though the day sky, the night sky, and the earth will dissolve one day, my teachings will always exist in the spiritual ether and in the hearts of souls that go on and mature even further in the higher spiritual realities of the third Olam and beyond. There was a man called Papias. And Papias, he lived at a time when he could record the teachings of John, the disciple of Jesus. So Papias was a hearer of St. John, the beloved. And he was also a hearer of John's direct disciples. So the modern church often twists this whole part as being the end of the world, and that Jesus will come in a second coming at the end of the world to raise the living and the dead, and there'll be destruction and horror and fear. Papias heard and recorded something much different than what modern Orthodox Christians proclaim. And again, Papias recorded sayings that stemmed from St. John to his immediate disciples. And many of these disciples and John himself knew the living Jesus, heard him teach. So let's read what Papias recorded from St. John and his disciples. Here's what Papias recorded about the future of the earth in the fragments of Papias. As the elders who saw John the disciple of the Lord remembered that they had heard from him, that they had heard from him St. John, how the Lord, Jesus, taught in regard to those times, and said, "The days will come in which vines shall grow, having each 10,000 branches, and in each branch 10,000 twigs, and in each true twig 10,000 shoots, and in every one of the shoots 10,000 clusters, and on every one of the clusters 10,000 grapes, and every grape when pressed will give 25 metretes of wine. And when any one of the saints shall lay hold of a cluster, another shall cry out, 'I am a better cluster, take me, bless the Lord through me.' In like manner, Jesus said, that a grain of wheat would produce 10,000 ears, and that every ear would have 10,000 grains, and every grain would yield 10 pounds of clear, pure, fine flour, and that apples and seeds and grass would produce in similar proportions, and that all animals, feeding then only on the productions of the earth, would become peaceable and harmonious and be in perfect subjugation to man. Testimony is born to these things in writing by Papias, an ancient man who was a hearer of John and a friend of Polycarp. In the fourth of his books, for 5 books were composed by him, and he added, saying, "Now these things are credible to believers." And Judas the traitor, says he, not believing and asking, "How shall such growths be accomplished by the Lord, Yahweh?" The Lord, Jesus, said, "They shall see who shall come to them." These then are the times mentioned by the prophet Isaiah, "And the wolf shall lie down with the lamb," etc. So modern Christian orthodoxy says that the coming of Messiah in those times, after the time of Jesus' death on the cross, that shortly after the end of the world would come and the resurrection of the dead would happen. Paul expected the second coming of Jesus to happen before Paul died. Just read his letters. It didn't happen. How many times have crazy people, crazy preachers all over the world said, "On this day at this time, drink poison and go to heaven with me. Commit suicide and go to heaven with me on a spaceship." All because of twisted theologies and doctrines that are wrong. Wrong. They all claim the world will come to some kind of fiery end and Jesus will take them to heaven and everybody else will go to hell. Jesus said in those times, after the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple, that slowly over time, things would become miraculously better, not worse. That as people spiritually evolved, experienced the rebirth within, experienced the opening of their hearts, that the world would get better, not worse. That the world would go on, not end. Read the history that Papias recorded from St. John and his immediate disciples. Those people that knew and walked with Jesus. Jesus did not teach a pessimistic end to the world. He taught that things would get better. Maybe they wouldn't be the way that we thought they would be from a Jewish perspective of his time. But the world will get better. And when you look at the world, it has. If you were to live in the times of Jesus and before, it would be a very difficult world to live in. This part of the world was taking over this part of the world. They were enslaving this people. They were killing this people. They were taking over this land so they could have a land to grow agriculture from. Everything was so violent back then. And relatively over the course of time, despite wars, it has gotten better from those days. Medicine has developed. Agriculture has developed. Spiritual ideas have developed. Humanity has developed. Do we have a long way to go? Yes. And that is why the birth pangs of Messiah are still happening. Especially right now in today's world where so much is going wrong. There are a lot of scary things happening for a lot of people from a lot of different perspectives. This is the continuation of the birth pangs of Messiah in this time. For every difficult situation, good people must stand up, must speak up, must act, must give, must teach. And then these things too shall pass, and humanity shall grow through these current birth pangs that humanity is experiencing. In the Ukraine, in Gaza, in literally every country around the world that is experiencing pain in their own way. May God take us by the hand and help us to grow spiritually and to come into this age of peace that Papias said that John preached. Let us continue with the Liturgy of the Chalice.